Hello, hello, hello. It's Dr. Jess here for another Hot Topics Tuesday. And today we're talking about dealing with grief and loss. We're on the anniversary of my first loss with my son, my first pregnancy, 20 weeks. I named him Isaiah Christopher Daigle. And so on January 16th in 2012, I remember coming home from eating out with my husband and sitting down at the table, and shortly after that feeling a gush of fluid. And since it was my first time being pregnant, I didn't know if I was using it on myself or it was some discharge. So I went to the bathroom and noted that it was consistently coming, and I realized what was happening. Prior to that, I had already been kind of put on bed rest, which is very hard to do at home if you're a person used to moving around. But I'd really given it the best that I could, right? And so after going to the hospital and going through all the stages, I ended up delivering my baby, who subsequently passed away. And so this experience really changed the course of my life in a huge way, more so my understanding of the fact and realization that this type of loss, especially, is not something that a lot of people readily share. But for the people who knew I was pregnant, after talking with them about what had happened, many of them went on to share that they too had had either a miscarriage or loss of some sort. And it was people that I felt fairly close to. And so it really underscored a lot of things for me. A lot of lessons have come from the experience. And one of which is a lesson about grief and loss, which I would like to share with you today. So I like this quote because I think it speaks to the shared humanity of dealing with grief and loss. We bereaved are not alone. We belong to the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering. And this is by Helen Keller. And this is the thing that I think one of the things that unites us as humans. So, no matter what your race, your socioeconomic status, your financial status, your education, we all will experience grief and loss. And so, and the suffering that can ensue because of these things. And so that is one of the biggest take home messages that I wanted to get across, is that you're definitely not alone in this process, even though it can feel that way when you're going through your situation. So, what is grief? It's the natural reaction to loss or change. And I think it's important to point out that it's natural. And the other thing that's important is that it does not always have to be the death of a loved one. We grieve change, period, because it's what is not anymore. That hope that you may have had for a relationship, a job, a dream, any of it, when you are put in a situation where you have to make a change from it or go without it. Grief is the natural expression of the emotion and process that we often have to go through. So many of you have probably heard of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And when I had my loss, I tried to think about, reflect back on, did I endure like all of these stages? And I think to some degree I did. So with denial, that's like you kind of carry on. It's really a protective mechanism. So many times you're still in shock of what has happened. And so you many times have no choice but to kind of keep going, because a lot of things have to still be done. are taken care of when you've experienced a loss. Say with the loss of a child or a loved one, there's funeral arrangements that have to be made and getting those types of affairs in order, which lends to the survival of I've just got to get this done. I don't really right now have time to wallow in my pain. And then next comes the anger. I remember being very mad at God, just wondering like, why would he allow me to have a child that I wouldn't have? You know, why I believe in power and miracles. Why couldn't he have made my body strong enough to sustain carrying my son? Like, why was my cervix giving out? And so I was mad at my OB for not being there for the delivery. And all of these things I had to process. And then there's bargaining. So that's more to do with it's like you feel some guilt. So you feel like, well, if I just do this or that better, maybe it won't happen again, or maybe it'll make the situation better, especially if the loss is not a finite, is something like death, but say is a relationship that is changing. And you're like, well, maybe if I do this or be this way or do this, it'll make this person love me or stay or something like that. And then there's depression. So that's full on like not eating, not drinking, not wanting to be around anybody, not really wanting to take care of yourself, just excessive sleep. Sometimes it comes out as anger again too, or being irritable. And I don't know if I had too much of that. I think for me, when I'm sad, I sleep a lot. That's my way of coping. I know that about myself. And so I try to pay attention to my feelings when I feel that way. And then there's acceptance. So eventually you realize this has happened and I can't go back and change it, but I can do my best to move forward through it because the situation is still there in the history, right? And so, like with the loss of my son, over time, I really had no problem sharing because I'm a pretty transparent person, but it would be like repeatedly ripping off a band-aid, especially because I was in residency and like you repeat a rotation. So meaning like you might do like a ER rotation in the fall and then again in the spring. A lot of times you have to do like the same rotation 1 to 3 times. Um, and so people who had seen me in like that November and knew I was pregnant, like when I went back in like, I think it was like March or April, then they were like, hey, like, where's your baby? Did you have the baby? And then I'm having to tell them that I had a miscarriage. And so then when I had made strides to move forward, I felt like I was getting ripped back. And unfortunately, that's part of the process because, as people know, which is why sometimes a lot of moms won't tell people they're pregnant until they're a little bit past the 20 weeks, unless they're really just showing, or they may tell a few people. And so that was how it was. But eventually I got to a place where I could share my story because I saw other people going through it and I wanted them to know they were not alone. And I wanted them to be able to have someone to talk to if they needed. So here are 5 truths about grief, because when people are dealing with grief, especially family and friends who mean well, sometimes they can come off really insensitive and they can, most of the time people want to put a time limit on you. And so the first thing is grief is normal and natural, like we said. So it's a reaction to loss or change. And in line with that is personal. So how it is displayed can vary. Like I just said, like I sleep or I like to go and do other things when I'm dealing with change or loss. Everyone responds differently. You ideally want people to have healthy ways to process. So, not succumbing to drugs and alcohol use or medication abuse or things like that, things that would make it more harmful for them. You want them to do more natural things like counseling and talking to family and friends, and things like exercise and the nutrition, all the things that's part of positive self-care are things that help you get through your grief. But it's personal. And even in that, though, there's still community that you can be involved in to help you on the process. And that's the next part. Grief is a process. So we talked about the stages that one often goes through. In line with the fact that it's a process, number 4 is not time restricted. So that's where a lot of times family and friends who mean well, because they really don't want to see you in that, especially that depression state where you're not living like your best life, so to speak. People want you to kind of snap out of it. But the reality is that you always will have some measure of grief about it. It's just that it looks different over time. And a lot of times you become a little bit more better at managing it, dealing with it, and not letting it make you stuck, which is what we want. Just because if we don't move through with it and let an acceptance of this is my new normal, but I still have a life that's worth living now type of thing, then you end up really succumbing to depression and going downward. And we don't want that. I don't really think that that is what anyone will want, or even God's best for you. And then last, it is manageable. So I did a talk with a counselor in October, which is Pregnancy Loss and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And, she talked about like it never goes away. You just get through it and you learn how to exist with it. Like it is part of you, your history of knowing that this loss, this change occurred. And you become okay with, you either have a process of self-talk or your rituals of celebrating that loved one. Like with my son, I acknowledge his life by sharing that he was here and and I've used that loss and that process of how it even happened to fuel my empathy when I take care of patients, to be present and to be sympathetic and empathetic and validate and reassure families and let them know they're not alone on this journey of loss and life, and even not loss if of a death, but even if it's something like their baby having to go to the NICU or their child being born with some type of genetic anomaly. So whatever your story, whatever you're grieving for, the change that has happened, the loss of a relationship, of a loved one, of a job, of a dream, know you are not alone and that there is support available for you. And so here are some resources, because the one thing I want you to take away, other than the grief is natural in the process and all of the other truths that I shared, is that it's so important for you to realize that you still matter and to talk with someone, trusted person, hopefully a professional, and to not look at it as a stigma of yourself, but that you are doing what you need because you deserve support during these changes in your life. And it does not make you weak. It does not make you different or weird or incapable of handling things. It's actually the opposite. It takes courage to let someone know that you are suffering and that you need help to get to a better place. And so many other resources can be found on counseling.org related to your specific loss. So again, it's not necessarily the death of a loved one. It can be grief because someone's going through cancer, or even something like losing a pet. Like people grieve from that too. And the point is that whatever your circumstance, no one has the right to frown down upon you because of your journey or experience, because that is the point. We all have something or someone or some situation that has meant a lot to us. And when that situation has changed or is no more, we go through changes and processes emotionally ourselves, and we deserve support in that. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this talk. I hope it was very helpful for you. I am a pediatrician and a NICU doctor and a breastfeeding medicine doctor in Atlanta, and I'm happy to help moms and their babies on their postpartum journey, and even available for virtual consultations, even about this. So if you just need support in your situation, you can head to my link and you can book a free meet and greet with me and see if you think I'm someone that can help you on your journey. And if so, I can send you more information about that. But what I want you to know is that in this journey of life, you're not alone. Your life is worth living, and you have the courage inside of you to seek the help that you need because you deserve the help that you need. Okay? I hope that this has helped you. Please share with a friend that you know could benefit from this discussion. And until next time, I hope that you have a great rest of your day.